Policy Landscape and Needs report, which was developed under Work Package 1 of OBSGESSION. And in addition to presenting this report, we'll also take some time to discuss around the next steps, especially concerning the planned update of this report scheduled for June 2026. So I will quickly walk you over the agenda. We will begin with a presentation from my colleague, Natasha Ali, the Acting Head of Policy here at UNEP WCMC, who will be presenting the Policy Landscape and Needs report. This will then be followed by a short presentation from Elnaz Ninabaz from the University of Twente, who will outline how this report feeds into further work under Work Package 1, particularly the Science Policy Traceability Matrix under Task 1.2. And then we'll finish with an open discussion, which will give you the opportunity to ask any questions that you might have, share your thoughts, especially around the future direction of this work. So with that, let's get started. I'm pleased to hand over to Natasha for the first presentation. Natasha, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Stella. Good morning, colleagues. I'm just going to share my screen. Checking that you can see my presentation.
Yes, it's all good. Great.
Okay, I'll make a start then. Today I'm going to present, as Stella says, the Policy Landscape and Needs report under deliverable D1.1, developed under Work Package 1 of this project. And I just want to flag that I'm presenting the work that was undertaken by Aisha and Stella, who is online. So firstly, just to provide some context, in 2022, Europabon published a user policy needs assessment where they identified and ranked the importance for national policy making, essential biodiversity variables and essential ecosystem service variables, so that's EBVs and EESVs, to answer key policy questions for the EU policy legal framework. Sorry, that's just gone on without my asking it to. Such as the Birds Directive, the Habitats Directive and the EU restoration laws. They found that 1/3 of EBVs included species abundance, species-specific taxa, species distribution, community abundance and ecosystem distribution variables. They also found that many EBVs can be mapped to existing indicators for reporting on the assessment of the conservation status of habitat and species in the Habitats Directive under Article 17. EBVs also have the potential for use in the assessment of good condition of habitats and species under several EU directives, such as the Marine Strategy Framework Directive and the Water Framework Directive. However, it's important to flag that the assessment also highlighted several biases in several of the monitoring schemes that were assessed under these EU directives. For example, they found a strong bias towards the monitoring of protected areas and species, which I'm sure you can imagine, particularly birds and mammals, where I guess the data is strongest, and as well as significant gaps in the monitoring of habitats, ecosystems and genetic diversity at the EU level, suggesting that EU monitoring schemes may not support the full range of biodiversity policy needs. So OBSGESSION aims to address some of these biases and gaps to help inform the development of biodiversity products in order to better support EU policy needs. Recognising that there are lots of different mapping efforts like Europabon's, we focused our review for this project on the EU Biodiversity Strategy for 2030, which serves as an overarching framework as the EU biodiversity related policies and legislation. And so what we did was we based our mapping under this task on the overview of the actions that are in the EU biodiversity strategy, as an example shown in this table, and relevant EU policy and legal frameworks where applicable. And this included, but was not limited to, the Habitats Directive, Birds Directive, Water Framework Directive, Nitrates Directive, and the EU Nature Restoration Law. And therefore, under Task 1.1, the needs of biodiversity policy at the EU level were identified through the framework provided in the EU Biodiversity Strategy for 2030. So as such, the OBSGESSION Policy Landscape and Needs Assessment aimed to identify EBV candidates based on the policy needs that are articulated in the EU Biodiversity Strategy. I hope that's clear. So what did we do? Well, we started by reviewing the 102 actions and sub-actions outlined in the Biodiversity Strategy, along with the 16 indicators that are available on the Biodiversity Strategy dashboard at this time of writing. And then we mapped these actions and indicators to the 21 EBV candidates, grouped into 6 classes as proposed by GEOBON and set out on this slide. And we use this framework to ensure consistency with established EBV frameworks and to facilitate integration with other monitoring efforts. So just looking at exactly how this was done, to identify where EBVs could be used to support policy needs and actions, we filtered those actions based on whether or not EBVs could broadly support their implementation or monitor their implementation. And indicators were filtered based on whether EBVs could be used to meet their data requirements. And this resulted in a data set of EBVs applicable EU Biodiversity Strategy actions and indicators. These actions and indicators were subsequently tagged according to their relevance to the different stages of the policy process, as well as tagged by ecosystem realm. And then we mapped the actions and indicators to specific EBV classes and candidates and ranked these from high to low policy priority based on the number of actions and indicators that they were mapped to, both overall and within a specific policy process and ecosystem realms. And candidates were linked to the greatest number of actions and indicators, and those were the ones that were indicated as the highest policy priority. So these are the results. Our review found that EBVs could broadly be used to support the implementation of 37 out of the 102 actions that we reviewed, so that's less than half, and monitoring 5 out of 16 of the indicators from the strategy dashboard, again, less than half. But as you might expect, overall, the species abundance candidate ranked first in terms of policy priority, followed by species distribution as second, ecosystem distribution as third, and ecosystem vertical profile as fourth. In a broader class level, the ecosystem structure class was mapped to the highest number of actions and indicators, with all 3 of its candidates ranking in the top 1/3 of the candidate ranking list. The species population class followed, driven by high rankings of species abundance first and then species distribution second. However, it received lower overall score compared to the ecosystem structure class because it only includes 2 candidates. The genetic composition class had the lowest overall ranking, being mapped to only 14 actions/indicators in total. But these rankings might reflect biases in the EU biodiversity strategies towards ecosystems and species level, and fewer policies that are addressing genetic diversity, or the outcomes reflect differences in the technical feasibility of using EBV candidates and classes. Looking at the ecosystem realms, we aim to identify whether certain EBVs candidates are more relevant to policy needs within specific realms. Selected actions and indicators were assigned to freshwater, marine or terrestrial realms, or as cross-cutting. As shown in the table, I'm not sure if you can see that clearly, the majority of selected actions were categorised as either cross-cutting or terrestrial, with 15 actions each, while only 4 actions were assigned to the freshwater realm and 3 to the marine realm. And similarly, most of the selected indicators, 3 indicators, were assigned to the terrestrial realms, which is, I mean, everybody kind of is aware of where the data biases sit. As we can see from the figure on the right, the ranking by ecosystem realm largely support the overall EBV ranking, with species abundance, species distribution, ecosystem distribution, and ecosystem vertical profile being consistently mapped to the highest number of actions and indicators across all realms. Looking across the policy processes, here we aim to assess the importance of different EBVs at various stages of the policy cycle: planning, implementation, review, and reporting. Actions were tagged based on which stage they were most relevant to, whereas all 5 indicators were categorized under reporting. The distribution of selected actions showed the most actions, 23 out of 37 actions, were relevant to the implementation stage, followed by policy, planning, review, and reporting. Again, these results support the overall ranking of EBV candidates, with the top 4 candidates being consistently ranked as highest priority EBV candidates across all policy stages, but the genetic composition candidates, as before, ranked low across all stages. Ecosystem level EBVs ranked higher in the review stage, with ecosystem distribution and ecosystem vertical profile ranking first, compared to second and third overall, potentially reflecting the need for more ecosystem scale data for policy review processes. Similarly, species distribution and ecosystem distribution were ranked as top joint priorities at the planning stage, potentially highlighting the importance of distribution data for policy planning. However, these results are constrained by a relatively small number of data sets and actions linked to the planning, reporting, and review stages. So as a result, even minor differences in the candidate scores within the realms can lead to a shift in the rankings. So in conclusion then, the top 4 ranked EBV candidates in terms of policy priority are species abundance, closely followed by species distribution, ecosystem distribution, and ecosystem vertical profile, which fall under the species population and ecosystem structure class. These candidates had markedly higher scores compared to other candidates, highlighting their strong relevance for monitoring and implementation of a wide variety of actions in the EU biodiversity strategy. They were also consistently ranked among the top 4 candidates in their different ecosystem realms and stages of the policy process. So that would indicate their importance to multiple dimensions of biodiversity policy. These rankings are to some extent consistent with the EBV rankings from the Europa BON assessment, except for ecosystem vertical profile was ranked as a low policy profile in that study. As such, based on the results of our review and the Europa BON assessment, species abundance, species distribution, and species distribution and ecosystem distribution candidates are recommended to be prioritised to address policy needs. And they could also be used for the development of biodiversity products under OBSGESSION to best address EU policy needs. Concerning the ecosystem vertical profile candidate, further consideration might be needed to require whether or not it genuinely is a policy priority. Some of the limitations of the work, though, that we've done should be highlighted here. So the approach used in this study is on the broad nature of many of the actions of the EU Biodiversity Strategy 2030, which allowed for a range of interpretations for many of the potential implementation approaches and data needs, and therefore could lead to a range of different EBVs being mapped. This was particularly relevant when mapping actions compared to indicators, as indicators have clearer data needs and were typically associated to either 1 or 2 EBVs. The broad applicability of EBVs candidates for ecosystem structure and function classes, they can result in more frequent mapping and use. This could have led to an overestimation of their policy priority compared to how the actions are implemented in practice. Another limitation was the prioritization of EBVs that was solely based on a number of actions and indicators they supported, rather than the importance of each EBV for specific actions or indicators. And there is a lack of a relevant scoring system which meant that all mappings carried equal weight, which could have led to an over or under ranking of certain candidates. And then finally, just to note, one final limitation was that the lack of contextualization may also limit the accuracy of the prioritization exercise we've undertaken here, because the approach might not fully consider all of the technical feasibility, the knowledge gaps, data gaps, or the capacity to use and monitor EBVs. And some of these factors should be considered as part of further work, perhaps under work package 2 of the Science Policy Traceability Matrix under task 1.2. So next steps then, the policy landscape review presents this initial approach that could be expanded through a project lifecycle. And an update report is due in June 2026. But here what I've done is highlighted some of the next steps that we'd like to do in this review. So firstly, we'd like to address some of the limitations mentioned, refining the mapping, which can be done through interviews with policymakers and practitioners with experience in using EBVs and knowledge, and perhaps experience at the regional, national and sub-national levels. We feel that engaging with policymakers would help us with a better understanding of how the actions are implemented and in practice, and how that could improve the accuracy of EBVs and the mapping process that we've undertaken. Additionally, we would want to introduce a relevance scoring system, which would address the potential overemphasis on ecosystem structure and function variables, and provide a more precise prioritization of EBVs. And finally, we think that it would be worth looking at the mapping of the EBVs to global commitments, and a set of those EBVs that could be, for example, used to monitor the indicators that are included in the monitoring framework for the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. That could be another step that we could take as further work. And with that, I will end. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Natasha, for providing that overview. So I think we'll now move into the next presentation before we open the floor for discussion. So I'm pleased to pass the floor now over to Elnaz. Elnaz, over to you.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, we see it, but it's currently not in presentation mode.
Yes. How about now?
There we go. Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you and good morning all, and thank you for Natasha to give a very nice presentation about concerning task 1.1. It is very much relevant to what we are doing in task 1.2. So as you can see in this task, we are several partners involved in this specific task. ITC, Brookman Consult, Vito, University of Zurich, and the people who are mentioned here that I thought that is good to name them. So in general, if I want to give some overview about the task 1.1, the 1.2 is that we try to contribute to science policy traceability matrix to prioritize and design and monitor EBV. By considering the EU directive and policy and based on the European Green Deal and nature-based solutions. So in this regard, one of the requirements for this specific task is that we review the previous initiatives and projects that in particular focus on EBV's developments and also improving or prioritizing EBV candidates. If I want to give some overview about the link that this task has with other work package and also other tasks in work package 1, as Natasha mentions, we use the outcome of the task 1.1 in this task. However, our result at the end will be shared with work package 2, task 1.4, And also we get some information from work package 5 that they focus on the pilots. So it's a very interactive task, as you can see. However, we noted that there are some from the time perspective, there is no good match between the progress of these task. For example, task 1.2 deliverable dates, it's in a year. However, we noted that, for example, the work package 2 already has a deadline by end of this year. So there are some mismatch in that regards. So the action items that we have in this task, first of all, is identifying the scientific gaps by reviewing the, as I said, previous initiatives, assess the technical requirements, and also assess the collaborative network gaps, and at the end, integrate into science policy traceability matrix. The deliverable of this specific task will be in the format of the report that at the end we will share with everyone. But so far we had a good progress. We tried to address the knowledge gap analysis through the reports. We came up with the 2 realms. One, we focus on terrestrial ecosystem, and the other one, it is freshwater ecosystem. So so far we reviewed 4 projects: EU for Diversity, Biomundo, Globe Diversity, and also Europe-bound results, and also the reports that are provided. Among these reports that they very much focus on EBVs, the ABV development, Biomundo is the only projects that extensively focus on freshwater ecosystem, and the remaining projects were focusing on terrestrial ecosystem. As you can see, we reviewed these initiatives based on the identification of the knowledge gap, science policy linkage, and also the technical collaborative gaps. Each of these sections has some subsections. For example, for the identification of the knowledge gap, we focus on the current limitation in remote sensing biodiversity products that we use as a proxy of the EBVs, from the scientific challenge in EBV development and unmet scientific requirement. For science policy linkage, we focus on alignment with the EU directives and policies, and also key policy science integration needs. And last but not least, concerning technical and collaborative gap, we focus on a technical requirement for advancing EBVs, and also collaboration and networking gaps. And at the end, we come up with the recommendation and advising some next steps. The report is ongoing very well. We are at the last, more or less last stage, that we eventually will send a review to expert within the project and also outside of the project to review and give the comments in order to enhance the quality of the report. But next step that we are currently focusing is that previously it was the list of the biodiversity metrics to observe from space prioritized by focusing on EBVs and the EBVs that can be retrieved using Earth observation data based on their relevancy, feasibility, accuracy, and maturity. We try to review this list concerning the same criteria to see that after 5 years, whether there is any improvement from the relevancy, feasibility, accuracy, and maturity of each remote sensing biodiversity product that link to these EBVs. Previously, as you can see, the Nature paper done by Andrew Skidmore, they mainly focus on the terrestrial ecosystem. However, since in this task we have a partner with the high expertise in the freshwater, we also try to address this list for the first time from the freshwater perspective. And I have just 5 minutes to elaborate on what we have done. So thank you very much. Feel free to approach us if you have any question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elnaz. It's nice to see how the prioritisation of the EBVs is progressing under Work Package 1, also taking into account the scientific side rather than the policy side.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's now move on to the discussion part of today's seminar. Please feel free to raise your hand, or you can also share any thoughts that you have in the chat. We welcome any questions, comments, and/or reflections that you have, particularly on the upcoming update of this policy landscape and needs report and some of the next steps that Natasha presented, as well as any broader comments on the direction of Work Package 1. So the discussion is now open. Okay, I think Elnaz, you were first, so please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Natasha, for your nice presentation. So if I be correct, in your prioritizing list, the species distribution and species abundance rank 1 and 2. Is it okay? Is it right? So my question is that, is there any justification that why these two EBVs ranked as a first and second EBV candidates? So how you justify this? Because from the Earth observation perspective, and I mentioned in the paper that Andrew written, from the feasibility and relevancy, they are not come up with the high ranking. But I want to see that why this, from the policy perspective, it's different.
I mean, all I can do, so this isn't work that I've undertaken, just to be clear from the outset, and we can refer you back to the report, but all I can do is just explain the way that we did the ranking. So just in terms of mapping those actions to those EBVs, that's how it emerged as priority 1 and 2. But you know, as we noted in our opening remarks, because there might be more of a bias towards species and ecosystems within EU actions and policies within the strategy that we undertook, then it might account for the fact that they rank higher in this study. I think further work would be required to just ascertain whether or not that's the case, and it might be that we look across different directives or different work to be clearer, because we only looked at 102 actions from a specific strategy. So it could be that the bias that's picking up from there.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay, so next on my list, I have Roshana, please.
Yes, thank you very much for the presentation. Both, I also have a question to Natasha. On the list that you demonstrated, I saw that you have come up with 15 variable to be listed under the threshold, and then there are also another 15 on the cross sectorial. Does it mean that all those which are falling under the EBV threshold, like under the threshold, are they all cross sectorial as well, or these are totally different ones? So what is the overlap between these cross sectorial and the ones that are falling within the threshold?
I don't know, so I'll need to go back to the original report, and then we can respond to you after this, because I didn't undertake the study, and that's that information wasn't provided me for this. So I'll look it up and we'll get back to you.
Yeah, it would be interesting to know from this cross sectorial which one belongs to which ecosystem. Particularly, I'm interested on the threshold ecosystem, so I would like to know which one are among those cross sectorial. Actually, thank you.
Sure, we'll look it up for you. Thanks.
Just to note, Susanna and Zahail are also online who are involved in the report, so please feel free to jump in if you feel that you could respond to any of the questions. Next on my list, Maria, please go ahead.
Hi, good morning. It was very interesting to see both presentations, and I was curious about your opinion on the matches and mismatches, and what is the circularity here? So are the policy EBV is being informed by the science, and is the science being informed by the policy EBVs? And so how much overlap is there? And how are we sure that we're not going in circles in here?
Elnaz, perhaps you can answer this in terms of how the policy is informing the science from task 1.1 to task 1.2.
Maria, was a question for me?
Well, it was for both of you, because I think
Okay.
How much did you cross-relate references, and how much can you trace whether, for example, the earlier papers from like Pereira and all of that get used for the policy recommendations, and then the policy recommendations influence the science? So I'm just interested in what's the feedback loop here between the science and the policy.
I didn't at this stage we didn't think at that perspective. We just because we just reviewed the previous report in 1.2, and so our outcome at the report at this stage is very much depends on the reports and the information that provided in different initiative. However, I think it's a mutual way that we can consider. However, from the, for example, previous work that we've done to prioritize the EBVs, remote sensing biodiversity product that can be retrieved using Earth observation, it was from the science perspective to give advice to space agencies to come up with to prioritize certain products that are very much linked to EBVs, and it seems that they are not, in terms of the maturity and the accuracy, they are not in the good stage. However, it's very much relevant for the scientists, for the researchers, and at the end for policymakers from that perspective. However, in that work that we done, if I recall correctly, Andrew can comment on that, we didn't look at it from the policy perspective. It was purely scientific perspective. But I agree that in somewhere this needs to be connected to make sure that what we propose as a prioritizing is relevant to what policy and decision makers needs. But on the other hand, there would be in some cases that research community needs some advancement in their products that for sure doesn't have any rationale for the policy perspective, but we should not ignore that part as well.
Yeah, it's more like the chicken and egg
It is.
problem of like, is the policy being formed by the science and the science being informed? So how does this actually work?
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yes, and maybe there should be more discussions around this point when we think about the update of the report and how we integrate the science better into this update. Andrew, I think you were next, please. I think you're muted still.
Yeah, we can't hear you, Andrew.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. No, thanks for the good talks, both of you. I was actually had a similar sort of follow-on question from Maria, that I think the kind of analogy with this would be iPhones, right? When they first came out. I mean, I can remember that. Some people here may not, but suddenly this phone had a camera, right? The technology produced things, and then policy people, everyone's saying, oh, what use would a camera be on a phone? And now, it's totally adopted. So it's a little bit, policy tends to reflect societal view, perhaps, the way people think about a topic, whereas, science and engineering marches on in terms of what can actually be done. And so that's, I think, to add to Maria and Elnaz's comment, that's where this mismatch or circular argument, it's not really a circular argument, it's more a kind of, they both need to listen to each other, essentially. And I think that's kind of important also in obsession, if we can link these two in a good way, then this would clearly, sort of push a lot of, say, work packages 3, 4, 5 into the forefront of the policy, what's coming out of that, but also what's coming out of the broader technology and science, and try to sort of in a clever way in the reporting highlight that as kind of, here are really great products which could be used and could be interesting for the policy. And the way society thinks about what biodiversity is, and vice versa, the scientists need to be informed about what society's thinking, because if they're coming up with ideas and technologies and science which is totally not related, or some hobby of someone not related to policy, that also is going to not be fitting. So yeah, I mean, that's a puzzle I think that within the project we can hopefully start to address. So it's good discussion. Thanks for the question also. Well, Maria starting this, I would say.
Thank you. And yes, we did also hear in our online dialogue that we had with the European Commission that there is a need for greater interaction with policymakers throughout this process. But then it's a question of how do we do this, whether it would be through interviews, surveys, or setting up some sort of meeting and mechanism to engage with them more frequently. Okay, Laurie and then Suzanne, please. Thank you.
Yeah, hi, thanks. Actually, my question is also related to what Maria said, because it is an interesting point. I'm in work package 2. I'm doing the benchmarking of products, EBV products. And actually there's one criteria that is called, is this EBV underutilized in certain policies? I already had a chat with Natasha about this I think it's a couple months ago, but now I can see that it's indeed actually not only task 1.1, but it's task 1.2. It's a little bit that interaction. It's exactly the interaction that Maria pointed out, because we couldn't find that in the deliverable. I read the deliverable of task 1.1, or the intermediate, let's say, and that was something that I couldn't find in there, but I too, because of this discussion, see that it is something that is needed to explore a bit more. So I wonder if it's on your agenda to do that, or is this something that still fits into the agenda? Because it would be interesting when we're benchmarking the products, because this is really a criteria that I couldn't fill in or score yet. So it's just also a question to task 1.1, task 1.2, if it's something you are going to take up.
I'm happy to go. Oh, do you want to go first?
Go ahead, Natasha.
Okay, thanks. So I think, well, first of all, just responding to Andrew's point, I think that this is the age-old question of science informing policy and policy informing, policy asking science and science informing policy, and that's obviously what this project is trying to address. I think it is important in the follow-up interviews, as Stella said, to ask the questions about what are the barriers to taking up these EBVs, and so the question it's framed quite leadingly. Why are they not taken up? I think the question is what are the implementation barriers to using them, and then we could explore that a bit further with policymakers. And I don't know that interviews are the way forward, to be honest. So we just need to think about how we would do that. And it might be that we do surveys or something, but we've done various other questionnaires through other projects, like the Co-op for CBD project. We've been asking similar sorts of questions, and it seems like there's just a capacity gap, a sort of technical capacity gap to uptake.
I was thinking from my side when I'm working on this, should we change that criteria to maybe indeed, like, is it how big is the barrier, or something like in rather scoring the barrier to take it up, instead of really looking at how many policies really make use of this EBV, because that might be difficult to quantify. Like you said, you are looking at a list of certain actions, so it's not that you can, you have maybe a bias towards other ones that you don't take up. So I don't know.
Agreed. I think that makes sense. I think not how big is the barrier, but what are the barriers, and then we can maybe rank them or something accordingly.
Okay, thanks for that feedback.
Thank you. Suzanne, please go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to add on that I think this is a key issue for Work Package 1 is this connection between policies and science, and especially when it comes to the freshwater realm. And I think looking at only the results from the biodiversity strategy, the freshwater realm really misses out. And it's very important that the other policies that actually already utilizes EBVs or EBV remote sensing biodiversity products are also considered before we maybe move on, as you say, in the next steps and looking at the GBF indicators or something like that, that we do have a look at what we already know, because we do know more than what is coming out of just looking at the biodiversity strategy. We have more knowledge about how these products and EBVs can be utilized, and that would help, I guess, or Laurie as well. So we need to do something now before sort of extending, I think.
Thank
And
you.
I guess, as Elna said, we are looking at, we are reviewing the products, and for the freshwater, this has not been done before. So Petra and I are thinking a little bit about how do we actually go about reviewing maturity and all sorts of other aspects when it comes to the EBV for the freshwater. I think we need to get together and have a think about how that assessment could be done, because that is something that you did before this project and are very familiar with. But if it's actually quite a bit of a task, but it's an important one.
Thank you very much for that point. Well noted. Yes, maybe we can go beyond the biodiversity strategy and then the habitats and the birds directive and look at maybe some of these strategies that are targeting fresh water to link up with what you're doing in the science space.
Well, especially the Water Framework Directive, which is one of the key ones for that.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Well noted. Okay, Petteri, please.
Yeah, first, thanks everyone for great presentations and good discussion so far. I think that was really interesting. My question is more about like next steps, how you see this, first this deliverable report, wrapping up all these discussions, but also then thinking a little bit further. So what I'm thinking is that quite often these species, couple of species, EBVs, and then ecosystem structure, and those are on the top of the list because they are so obvious and they are kind of like a easy aims and easy targets. But still, there's a lot of scientific interest for those which are on the lower ranked in this list, like ecosystem functioning or community composition. And because our project particularly promised that we will advance community composition related and ecosystem function, ecosystem structure related EBVs, I'm just thinking, is there any way forward to think about how to make a bundles of different EBVs if there are a couple of these highly ranked, but then we can maybe somehow try to evaluate if there are some which are lower in the ranking, like some ecosystem function, for instance, but when it's interlinked with these highly ranked, easier EBVs, is that maybe something what is then giving even more added value for policy advice as well? I don't know if you get grip of my thinking here, but I think that would be interesting to think about a little bit further or discuss if it could be somehow also put more spotlight for these which are there on the lower of the ranking, and then somehow, like a specific groups, they might be related with the pilots and these detection attribution frameworks also, that there might be some drivers behind which might have a different impact for species EBVs than they have for ecosystem function, and they might be different temporal scales as well. But somehow if it could be a little bit like taking few steps forward, where we are at the moment pretty much repeating these things year after year. So that I think that would be great outcome of all this work and collaboration between other work packages also in OBSGESSION. And we do have time anyway, so it doesn't need to be ready by the end of this year now for these deliverables, but maybe looking forward next year and new combinations. So just like an idea. Happy to hear your thoughts about that.
Thank you very much
Thanks.
for that. Yes, it was an interesting point, and this might be an area where policymakers actually do need the support, just because we're already looking at existing policies that often do already have existing data requirements and data needs that are already being filled. So maybe this is where we can actually look at better placing EBVs for policymakers. Elnaz, I noticed your hand went up. Did you want to respond directly to that question, or comment, should I say?
Yeah. I think I understand that it's in the list that Natasha provided, the species distribution and species abundance got the first and second ranking. However, if I just quickly review the table that we previously provided from the accuracy and maturity perspective, indeed these two products are not get the good score. So maybe we can reverse or point of view that despite we think that there are easy tasks using Earth using other information, in particular when it comes to ancillary data, they are not the easy task from the Earth observation perspective. So because of that, the accuracy and maturity is not in the acceptable level as we expected. And bear in mind that we don't, when we call for EBVs, for terrestrial ecosystem is not only vegetation cover, it includes the other species, birds, animals, that are very much indeed important and linked to the policy and decision makers a lot. And however, we cannot still monitor them using Earth observation as much as we want.
Thank you. Maria, would you like to take the floor?
Thanks. I think this discussion has been very interesting, and I just wanted to throw a provocative thought. Is this exercise to validate our own expertise, or actually to find out where are things where there is mismatch? For me, the mismatch is much more interesting than the fact that there is match between EBVs and Earth observation and policy requirements. So aren't we missing an opportunity by reviewing all of these documents to find where the mismatches are and to actually enable transformative change in policies?
I'm happy to respond. I'm sure everybody would like to respond to that one. That's a great question. Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting. It's a challenging chicken and egg situation, isn't it? But I think in exploring the barriers for uptake and use, that could go as a step towards what you're asking, and then to make a decision. Yes, go ahead.
The word barriers is already very provocative.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay. So maybe not barriers. I accept that. But in that gap, then let's say to identify what is driving those gaps, I think is a really important next step that we should take before going ahead and making suggestions and linkages that could be further used. And there's also an argument to be said that not all science, and certainly not all the data that's gathered for EBVs, needs to necessarily inform policy directly. They can just, they're still valuable in their own right. So we might find that not everything maps exactly to European policy, and we can make a justification as to why that's the case, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think that would be a very, if I may respond, just to have a conversation. No, I think that would be very valuable, but also the policy doesn't need to necessarily align with science, because we know the policy processes have many more aspects to take into consideration. But I just feel I'm just cringing here whether we're missing an opportunity to actually address these matches and mismatches and why do they occur, because we know they occur between science and policy processes, and whether this creates leverage points to change something in both sides, instead of just saying, oh, look, policies refer to all of these EBVs, great. Yeah, sure. But what are we trying to measure? Is the policy uptake of a scientific concept, or are we trying to figure out how to do policies that actually enable biodiversity, and we have some tools that might help us monitor what those policies are requesting?
Thank you very much. Yes, it was a really interesting point. I do think it it needs some more thought and maybe some more discussion within OBSGESSION around what are we actually trying to achieve. I see Rashanak.
Yes, thank you. My point now is not related to what the point that Maria read, but more to the point that Petteri also mentioned to this. If I may add to the point which was raised by Petteri, I also was puzzled by observing that the ecosystem vertical profile was ranked higher than even ecosystem function. I think actually ecosystem function should actually be ranked higher than vertical profile because basically vertical profile is useful for structural information, but it really is the functional indicators that directly inform biodiversity policy and climate adaptation. So I think, in my opinion, a vertical profile feed into this, but it is the functioning itself that should drive the decision. So for me, I would have expected that ecosystem function rank higher than the vertical profile.
Yes.
I'm going to ask.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think I was going to ask Suhail to step in, because my understanding is it was the top four were species in this order: species abundance, then species distribution, ecosystem distribution, and then vertical profile. But perhaps Suhail can confirm.
Yeah, but then ecosystem functioning was under that, so I would have expected this ecosystem functioning to be standing up higher.
Yeah, I would too. Yeah. Suhail, can you respond to that, or Susanna?
Yeah, thank you very much for the questions. That's an interesting point that you raised. And as you know, that the task objectives were to kind of link the different biodiversity strategy, the available EBV candidates. And as you know, that most of these knowledge gaps within the different policy actions that we looked at had questions around what kind of extent or ecosystem, or does a species thrive or not. So based on that one, when we tried to look at the EBV papers with Skidmore, so most of these action knowledge gaps could be answered by the remote sensing products that's involving the large scale distribution patterns, the abundances. So that's why they have ranked higher in comparison to others. Now, somewhere during the conversation, they said that, the kind of ranking for other candidates, particularly I'm looking at that Excel sheet, where you had ecosystem vertical profile, that's basically the disturbance factor. And we have really good remote sensing products for monitoring fire disturbances or any other change in ecosystem. So that, unfortunately, a narrow kind of remote sensing product doesn't broadly address the knowledge gaps within that we are looked into with the different directives in the BDS actions. So that's how I think the species distribution took over than the other EBV candidates. Now, the other question on the vertical profile. So vertical profile is, when I looked at it, we have very good data sets for marine RAM, and most of this, for example, chlorophyll concentrations, the turbidity, or whatever other marine parameters, they could all be kind of, it very well addresses in the ecosystem vertical profile criteria. So that is why ecosystem vertical profile took over more than the function itself. Now, function, I understand we have good products of measuring productivity and all the others, but they were mostly applicable in the terrestrial RAM. Thank you.
Thank you. And yes, it was a bit surprising because in the Europa Bon assessment, ecosystem vertical profile was ranked quite low. So that's why in the conclusions, we kind of combined the results of their assessment and we said that the ecosystem vertical profile candidate would need further consideration to determine whether it is a policy priority. Elnaz, please.
Yeah, I just want to mention that in the priority list, also vertical, the ecosystem vertical profile rank as more or less, if I'll be correct, rank 1. However, here we should see that we prioritizing from the policy perspective. We are not undermining the candidate that fell under ecosystem functioning. We are linking with the policy, and in particular policies that not all the policies, we have 100 actions that we link with those actions, and among these action vertical profiles got the highest one. I don't surprise, because in particular the disturbances, biological effect of the disturbances are relevant for the policies and decision makers and policy providers. So when it comes to the monitoring, so maybe it's ecosystem functioning, and in particular the EBVs that can be retrieved using Earth observation are very much meaningful for us because we are all familiar. However, I can feel that why this comes at the top priority in this list.
Thank you very much. I can see that we have 2 minutes left. So before we wrap up, I want to see if there's any final comments or questions from anyone. Sander, please go ahead.
Yeah, just a small one. Should we always look at what the policy needs or what the terrain managers need? Because if you ask the terrain managers, they need, they can easier make an uptake of the products, but they also have other needs than the policy makers. And one of the problems in the uptake then is, for example, if you talk in the Netherlands about scrub encroachment, tree encroachment, grass encroachment, that there is no agreement between the terrain managers about the definitions. And once the definitions are in place, what we define as a shrub, etc., also in terms of height, then the remote sensing also is better in place. But I would stress a little bit, don't forget the terrain managers in a way as well.
Thank you very much for that important point. Is there any more comments or questions? I do not see any hands.
I think we need to still this idea of the workshop thing was really nice, because I still think there are a lot of gaps or contracting points that there needs to be discussed. So I would very much like the idea of a workshop, because I think there is still a lot of points that we may not be addressed here. I mean, we can't argue in 1 hour meeting about all the details on this, but I think there is still like a lot of open-end questions that is just is there, and then it would be nice to discuss it within a workshop.
Yes, I think that would be a really great idea. Yes, 1 hour was certainly not enough to discuss this, but nevertheless, I think it was a good discussion. But maybe just the start, and we can continue it in another space, maybe in person. Let's see. Okay. So if anything comes to mind after the session, please do not hesitate to reach out to me by email. Hopefully you all have it. So thank you everyone for attending today's seminar. Special thanks to our presenters. I think Natasha's now left, but Elnaz. And as mentioned earlier, the presentations and recording will be uploaded to the internal seminar folder on SharePoint. Okay, thank you again, and have a nice rest of the day, everyone.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.